I think about the storyline of games, and I think a lot of those games are built on, classic ideas like the hero's journey, or maybe Nietzsche's The Camel to the Child, but these things that are ingrained in us that we understand, like the call to adventure, refusing the call, the threshold guardian, and those can kind of be experienced in a game, and you can get fulfilled in that way. But those seem to be myths that are from the Greek and the Western traditions. I've read some interesting mythologies from native communities where they don't really have the same thoughts on trauma or fear, or in their mythologies, the person that was the villain becomes a totem or maybe becomes a monument, and they're still revered. I'm wondering, it's a two-part question. What is mythology in voodoo like? Is there mythology in voodoo? And are you able to use those sort of mythological structures to incorporate in some of the work you're doing now, whether it's gaming or maybe you use that sort of story to move your life forward?
No, there is mythology in voodoo. I would say the definition of mythology would be a consistent cast of characters that have influence over our reality, right? Mm-hmm. And in Creole voodoo, there is a consistent cast of characters, but they don't interact with our reality in sort of unseen ways, like how in sort of most mythologies you have, this crop didn't grow because Demeter was angry or something, whatever. But in Creole voodoo, these entities, these deities, they're actually brought forth in our reality through a conjuring of a person. And for example, so let's say, for example, there's a domestic dispute that's happening in a community, right? And they're beefing, or whatever you want to call it, and they call in one of the town elders, right? And usually it's like an older guy or girl, it doesn't matter. It's sort of gender, doesn't matter. So in order for this entity to be conjured, you have to have a setting for this entity to reside in. So there's this one entity that you conjure where you have to have a top hat, you have to have a glass of like alcohol or some type of like spirit, whatever, and you have to put it on a table. You have to have a feather that's on the chair. And if you don't have any of these things, then when the actual elder comes in, that entity won't be conjured into that person. And then let's say you do have all of these elements. You have the top hat, you have the glass of like whiskey or whatever, and you have the feather.
Yeah.
In the table, they sit down on the feather, whatever, and they sort of, they have this conjuring, and it's a very physically demanding, violent thing that you see. You like, see a person contort themselves. You're doing all this stuff. And then this person who was a seemingly regular person before is talking in a very funny accent, doing weird things, saying wild stuff that's accepted by all, because all people see that person who walked into the door isn't that person anymore. That person that we saw is gone, and he or she has been replaced by a entity that only exists in this sort of spiritual world or whatever, but coming down to help us humans with the problem. So how does that translate to psychedelics? That's the ultimate question, and that's or gaming. Psychedelics does this thing, and it's a very consistent thing. It allows us to be more susceptible. Our suggestibility is increased. Ideas that were once thought of as like ridiculous before, all of a sudden they're like, man, I can see that. I envision a future where gaming gets to the point where we have ultra realistic imagery, whatever engine, Unreal 8 by that time, it's just perfect, right? But I envision a future of psychedelics in which we get to that point, we cross that uncanny valley. But in order for our brains to fully immerse ourselves in whatever gaming world is being created, whatever virtualized experience is being given, perhaps you have to increase that susceptibility with a pharmacological means, which could be that you have to take a dose of a psychedelic-like compound in order to prepare your brain, to experience whatever game you're playing.
I love it. It sounds like so much fun.
I foresee that element being incorporated in not only gaming, but any immersive experience that we encounter.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
I really
It's the first time this is the first time that I've put that together. Thank you for explaining it in that way, because I've never been able to see this thing that people talk about, but this is the first time I have. It was really well put. Thank you. It's fascinating to me. I think that seeing it from that angle is almost, I can see the promise of it. I can see the beauty of it. And I couldn't see that before. So this part alone is really wild to me. It is wild. It is amazing to think about the potential of gaming or altered perception or living in another dimension in a weird sort of way is what it's allowing you to do.
If only every funder and financial investor can have your vision, that epiphany that you just had.
Yeah.
I wish they would have that. So they would say, Zeus, here you go. Here's your funding. Let's make it happen. Let's increase, 8 subjects to 100 subjects. Here's the money. Let's make it happen. If only they had your vision.
Thank you for sharing it. Yeah. And look, I think that slow at first and then all at once, right? Being able to translate vision into reality is not something a lot of people can do. But if I can get it, I think that it's resonating, but I don't think I would have got it unless you explained to me the idea of the voodoo mythology. Like, I think that should be incorporated in the write-up right there. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like I think it's a big part of it, because when you were talking about the voodoo mythology and psychedelics, and all of a sudden I started seeing like somatic therapy. They talk about someone being a container, and that sounds a lot like what the person is that gets that sort of download or something like that. Like, it's very, you can almost start to change that language around to be synonymous a little bit. And I think it's also important that people who want to see that vision have maybe had some really either traumatic experiences or some big psychedelic experiences. Probably both would be better. But I think in high dose psychedelic experiences, people that have what are termed as breakthrough